If this video reached you, your ancient soul is crossing a threshold that most people never touch. And I'll speak plainly. Nothing you've lived so far explains what you feel, because you're not reacting to your current life. You're reacting to what you forgot before you were born. This is the central point of this forbidden revelation. And you're only hearing this because your real identity has begun to move inside you, like something awakening after centuries. It's not coincidence. It's not algorithm. It's not luck. It's a summons. And if your soul is ready, I must deliver what no superficial layer of spirituality dares to touch. In Hermeticism and Gnosticism, you don't awaken to something new. You awaken to what you were before descending into matter. And that is what's trying to emerge in you now. Write in the comments, I am ready to remember. And if you wish to go deeper, check the benefits and become a member. You feel this internal movement because the I you use every day is only a reflection, alone a shadow. Hermetic traditions explain that the ego is not an evil entity, but a temporary construction created to operate in the dense world. Gnosticism says that the divine spark, upon falling, loses sight of its own origin and begins to believe it is only what matter allows it to see. The shock is inevitable. You don't feel whole because you've been living inside an identity that is not yours. And the reason this video found you is precisely this. Something in you has begun to break through the layer of forgetting. And that break hurts because it destroys what you believed was real. Pause. Breathe. Because what comes next is not comfortable. In the Corpus Hermeticum, when the higher mind awakens, it does not awaken with ready-made answers. It awakens with the removal of the veil. What returns is not information. It is vision. It is the sudden perception that everything you defended as me was nothing but noise. And this is where Gnosticism meets Hermeticism. Both say that the human being lives asleep, trying to sustain a fragmented identity, while the soul, the real part, tries to remind it of what it was before form. You are not seeking meaning. You are seeking return. You are seeking origin. And origin is calling now. Observe what happens inside you when I say this. You feel you're not hearing something new, but something you always knew and could never explain. This is the Hermetic nous, the inner intelligence that does not depend on reasoning. It is silent recognition. Gnosticism calls it the memory of the light, the remembrance that you came from something that cannot be destroyed and therefore refuses to live reduced to a personal story. When you feel this calling, it is not spirituality, it is identity. It is your true self pushing against the limits of forgetting. And now comes the part almost no one is prepared to hear. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are not in crisis. What you call a difficult life is only the friction between your real consciousness and the false structure you adopted to function in the world. It is the clash between the eternal soul and the temporary identity. Hermeticism says, what is real can never be touched by what changes. Gnosticism reinforces, forgetfulness is the prison, not the world. Together, these traditions reveal the fundamental truth you never had the courage to face. The pain you carry is not weakness. It is memory trying to break through. Short pause, inner silence. Now continue. If this video reached you, it's not to teach you to become something. It's to remind you of what you were before forgetting. In Hermeticism, this means recovering the perception of consciousness as origin, not as a product of experience. In Gnosticism, this means awakening to the fact that your essence wasn't born with you. It entered you. It took on form, but it is not the form. And the true initiation begins when you identify what belongs to your soul and what is weight imposed by life, culture, fear, and time. This is why you feel that something is missing, because something is missing, the remembrance of yourself. An ancient soul, when approaching awakening, starts questioning everything, your habits, your relationships, your patterns, your desires, your fears. And the ego tries to hold on because it knows that if you remember who you were before incarnation, Nothing will be able to control you. Not guilt, not trauma, not expectation. The ego fears the truth because once it arrives, the ego loses its throne. But you are not the ego. You are the one who observes the ego. Now the greater shock. True awakening is not an expansion. It is a removal. It is not opening new doors. It is closing false ones. It is not acquiring something new. It is abandoning everything you never were. In Hermeticism, this is called the separation of the real and the illusory. In Gnosticism, this is the tearing of the veil. And when this happens, everything changes. You no longer search for meaning in matter. You create meaning from consciousness. And life stops being a battle and becomes a stage of return. If you feel you are living a breaking point, it's because you are. When the entire world starts losing color, it's because your soul has begun to recover vision. When nothing satisfies you, it's because you did not come here to be satisfied. You came to remember. Hermeticism says that the human being becomes free when he recognizes he has always been free. Gnosticism says that the soul ascends when it realizes that it was never separated from its origin. The two visions converge into a single point. You are older than your story, deeper than your name, vaster than your life, and more real than anything that changes. If this video reached you, it's because something in you is ready for the next step. Not the outer step, but the inner one, the return, the movement back to what exists before the I. The real question now is not, who am I? The question is, how much of what I call me actually came with me before I was born? And when you begin answering that, the portal opens. And the next portal begins now, because there is something even deeper that needs to be seen. And that is what will come next if you continue. What you feel now is not spiritual curiosity. It is an inner movement that does not accept going back. In Hermeticism, this is explained as the return of the higher consciousness, the part of you that never forgets who you were before form. When it rises, nothing in the world can silence it. And when Gnosticism speaks of the spark awakening, it does not describe a gentle moment of illumination, but an internal rupture that destroys the structures of ignorance. This is the process happening in you at this exact moment. And when this rupture begins, you see something you could not see before. You realize that your entire life was built on top of an identity that was not born with you. Your behaviors, your defenses, your beliefs, your fears. All of it is the result of layers placed over the soul, not created by it. Hermeticism teaches that the similar knows the similar, meaning only the divine part in you can recognize divine truth. And that is what is happening now. Your essence is recognizing what it has always been. Short pause. Observe what awakens inside you. Continue. The truth that almost no one admits is that awakening does not bring peace at first. It brings clarity, and clarity destroys illusions. The illusions you kept for years are now breaking because they no longer match who you really are. Gnosticism explains this as the process of disidentification from the lower world. It does not mean rejecting the world, but stopping the belief that it defines you. And that changes everything. It changes your posture. It changes your perception. It changes your center. In Hermeticism, the return to the true self is compared to the purification of vision. You do not become stronger. You become real. And when you become real, everything false in your life begins to fall apart naturally. Relationships, habits, thoughts, everything without root in your essence loses power. This is not loss, it is liberation. It is the soul reclaiming the space the ego tried to occupy. This process is irreversible. A soul that awakens does not go back to sleep. Gnosticism states that once the inner light appears, the darkness of ignorance can no longer rule, and this explains why you have felt different lately, as if drifting away from everything that makes no sense. It is not isolation, it is alignment. You are stopping living as a character and beginning to live as consciousness. Now observe something essential. The feeling of being different was never weakness. It was always a clue, always a memory, always a sign that you did not come here to adapt to the common pattern. In Hermeticism, this is called the higher nature, the inner call to return to oneself. In Gnosticism, it is the spark moving toward its origin. You are not different by accident. You are different by function. Pause, breathe, continue. When you begin to perceive that you are not your name, your past, or your suffering, a force that has always been within you begins to emerge. This force does not shout. It reveals. It does not push you. It reminds you. It says silently, return, see, recognize. And when you listen to this inner voice, you change effortlessly, not because you try, but because you can no longer be what you are not. This is where Hermeticism and Gnosticism meet fully. Both affirm that the human only awakens when he realizes that his entire life was built on a self that was never the true self. This realization is devastating and liberating at the same time. Devastating because it destroys your old identity. Liberating because it returns your real identity. And when this real identity begins occupying space inside you, something that was asleep begins to breathe again. It is the higher consciousness. It is the nous. It is the spark. It is what you were before incarnation. And that is what was calling you when you clicked on this video. The ancient soul recognizes the call even when the mind does not understand. The soul knows. The soul always knew. The ego tries to resist. It always tries. Because the ego survives through control, narrative, and comparison. But the soul lives by truth. The soul does not need to prove anything. It does not need to win anything. It does not need to be seen. The soul simply is. It exists with a stability that nothing external can shake. That is why, when awakening begins, everything the ego considers important loses its shine, because it no longer matches your essence. Hermeticism explains that the human being lives trapped when he confuses the temporary with the eternal. And Gnosticism says that the greatest prison in the world is not matter, but believing you are only matter. When you break that belief, a light turns on inside you. Not an emotional light, but a light of understanding, a vision that requires no effort, a clarity that cuts through everything unreal. And here enters the rarest and deepest point of awakening. You do not evolve. You return. You do not become better. You become true. You do not learn who you are. You remember who you have always been. And this remembrance begins now when you realize that everything you sought outside was always within. You were never far from yourself. You were only identified with what was not you. Short pause. What you feel now is not emotion. It is recognition. You are beginning to see that there is nothing you need to achieve to awaken. What exists is what you must let go of. Let go of the story they told you was you. Let go of the layers time placed on you. Let go of what fear convinced you was true. Let go of the idea that you are small. The soul was never small. It was only hidden. When you let go of all this, a silent force begins to rise within you. This force does not need to be explained because it comes before all explanations. In Hermeticism, this is called the return to the principle. In Gnosticism, it is described as the remembrance of the light. And this light is simply you, without the weight of forgetting. Now observe, the more you advance in this perception, the more you feel you are leaving a tight space within yourself and entering an inner vastness that has always existed. This vastness is your essence, the part that does not begin, does not end, and does not change. When you feel this, you are not imagining, you are remembering. The soul does not imagine, the soul recognizes. And the more you recognize, the more you perceive that you are not awakening by accident. You are awakening because your ancient soul decided it is time. It decided to cross. It decided to break through. It decided to return. And nothing can stop this movement. Not fear, not doubt, not the past. The calling is greater than all that. And if you are hearing this video, it is because the movement has already begun. The question now is no longer whether you will awaken, The question is what you will do with the truth emerging within you. Because when consciousness begins to see, it does not stop. And when it does not stop, it crosses everything that was once shadow. And when it crosses the shadow, it finds itself. And when it finds itself, everything you once called life reorganizes around this remembrance. Continue breathing in this state, because something even deeper must be revealed. And it can only be revealed when you are at this point of internal openness. At the point where you understand that you are not hearing a message, you are hearing your own soul speaking through it. And that is what you felt from the beginning. It was not newness, it was memory. And when memory awakens, the next portal opens. When memory awakens, the world around you does not change immediately, but you change in the way you see the world. And this inner shift is so deep that little by little, what once held you begins to lose meaning. Hermeticism explains this as the natural reordering of perception. Gnosticism says it is the gradual breaking of the fog that kept your consciousness limited. In both traditions, awakening does not remove external obstacles. It removes the inner blindness that made you confuse them with your identity. You begin to notice that many of your emotional reactions are not yours. They are conditioned responses of the old identity, the one built on fear, control, and the need for approval. When the soul begins to return, it does not react like the ego. It observes, it understands, it moves with precision. The ego seeks safety, the soul seeks truth. And you can clearly feel when a decision comes from the soul because it carries a firm silence, even when the outside appears turbulent. Short pause. Feel this inside. Continue. What you are experiencing now is the beginning of the process. Hermeticism calls discernment of the real. Tishre. To discern the real does not mean rejecting the world, but seeing what in it is merely a projection of the human mind. You are not here to fight matter. You are here to remember that matter is a stage, not an essence. In Gnosticism, this same idea appears as the spark returning to its own nature, a nature that was never trapped, only confused. As you awaken, you notice patterns that once repeated without explanation. Relationships that always return to the same point, automatic behaviors, pains that seem to have a life of their own. Now you see that these cycles were not destiny. They were reflections of the identity you believed you were. When that identity dissolves, the cycles dissolve with it. Nothing changes from the outside in. Everything changes from the inside out. The ego tries to resist the new because the new destroys the old. But the soul does not fear the new because the new is simply a return to the original. The soul recognizes the future because the future does not threaten what it is. This difference is crucial. That is why Hermeticism states that the awakened human acts from consciousness, not memory. And Gnosticism insists that salvation is not external. It is internal, not an event, a revelation. It is at this point that you begin to understand that life was never against you. It only reflected what you believed about yourself. And now that this belief is being dismantled, everything begins to reorganize. The world does not change. Your position within it changes. Your vision changes. Your vibration changes. Your reading of reality changes. And when this changes, everything that once seemed impossible becomes simple. Short pause. Breathe this understanding. Continue. The ancient soul has one characteristic no teaching can manufacture. It feels repulsion toward everything superficial. It cannot stand shallow explanations, does not settle for simple answers, and cannot tolerate living as if it were only a body. This was never arrogance, it was always memory. The ancient soul rejects the false because it recognizes, even without words, the taste of the true, and that is what brought you exactly here. Hermeticism explains that the return happens when the lower mind finally yields to the higher mind, not through forced submission, but through understanding. The lower mind recognizes that it cannot define truth. Its function is operational, not essential. Gnosticism describes this as the gradual defeat of inner ignorance, the ignorance that made you believe your identity was limited to the physical world. When this ignorance falls, even suffering changes shape. Pain ceases to be an enemy and becomes an indication of where you are still attached to what is not yours. This does not make pain desirable, but it makes it useful. Hermeticism says suffering always results from seeing the false as the true. Gnosticism says suffering is the echo of separation. And when separation begins to fade, the echo weakens, and then a strange sensation arises, a mix of lucidity and displacement. Lucidity because you begin to see what was once invisible. Displacement because the people around you still live trapped in layers of forgetting. You do not need to explain them. You do not need to awaken them. You do not need to prove anything. Awakening does not place you above anyone. It only reconnects you to what has always been yours. Short pause. Feel the inner silence. Continue. This is the moment when many feel fear, not because something is wrong, but because losing the old identity feels like losing the ground beneath your feet. But Hermeticism guarantees the real never lets you fall. And Gnosticism affirms the inner light never goes out. It can only be forgotten. When you remember this light, fear loses power. Fear exists only in the absence of vision. As vision returns, fear disappears. And here lies a crucial truth. You were never disconnected from yourself. You were only too involved in the constructed identity. And this constructed identity is not useless. It served a purpose. It allowed you to navigate the dense world. But that time is over. The ancient soul can no longer tolerate living in reductions. It can no longer tolerate living only to survive. It wants to remember. And remembering is what is happening now. In Hermeticism, the process of remembering is described as awakening to the divine intellect. It is not common intelligence. It is perceptive clarity. It is effortless vision. In Gnosticism, it is the soul realizing that the sensory world was never its true home. This realization does not create rejection of the world. It creates maturity. You stop seeking in the world what can only be found in consciousness. And something deep begins to arise, a feeling of inner stability that does not depend on circumstances. It does not depend on validation. It does not depend on comfort. It does not depend on anything external. This stability is your true nature. When you touch this, even for an instant, everything that once frightened you loses impact, because you realize nothing external has power over essence. Short pause. Continue. Now you see that much of human suffering comes from trying to protect the old identity, protecting the image, protecting the past, protecting the narrative. But the soul does not need to protect anything, because nothing can threaten it. It is prior to what changes. It is prior to what is born. It is prior to what perishes. When you recognize this, a lightness appears. Not emotional lightness, but ontological lightness, the lightness of being. And the closer you get to this lightness, the more you realize there is no need to fight the world. No need to win anything. No need to prove yourself. That need belongs to the ego. Awakening dissolves that compulsion. In Hermeticism, this is called inner equilibrium. In Gnosticism, it is the soul recognizing its own origin. And that origin is calm. But this calm is not passivity. It is strength. Silent strength, solid strength. Strength that does not need to display itself. The ancient soul moves like water, silent yet irresistible, soft yet indestructible. And you feel this taking shape inside you, a force that does not need to convince, only to exist, because it precedes everything. And the more you open to this force, the more you realize that what you fear is only a shadow created by the lower mind. The shadow has no substance. It only seems real, while you do not look at it with clarity. When you look, it loses form. Hermeticism insists that ignorance creates monsters. Gnosticism says ignorance creates prisons. And when ignorance falls, the prisons dissolve. Short pause. Breathe. Continue. You begin to notice that awakening does not make you different from who you were. It gives you back who you have always been. This is the central truth. You are not learning something new. You are recovering something ancient, something yours, something eternal, something that was never lost, only forgotten. And when this remembrance returns, you feel as if you are coming home without moving. And then what many call purpose appears. But purpose is not an external mission. It is not an action, not a task. Hermeticism says real purpose is a state of consciousness. Gnosticism says purpose is the recognition of one's origin. You do not need to discover your mission. Your mission is to remember who you are. When you remember, the rest aligns. And when the rest aligns, life flows in a way that once seemed impossible. Not because it becomes perfect, but because you stop resisting what is. Resistance was always the friction between the soul and the false identity. When that identity dissolves, the friction disappears. And what appears in its place is clarity. And clarity is freedom. Short pause. Continue. As you go deeper, you realize the ancient soul does not awaken to escape the world, but to move through it with vision. This is fundamental. Awakening does not separate you from life. It frees you within life. The soul does not reject matter. It only rejects identification with it. Hermeticism teaches that the wise live in the world, but do not belong to the common mental world. Gnosticism says the awakened soul walks among the sleeping without being captured by their dreams. And then you perceive something even more radical. True power is not in changing what is outside, but in seeing what is outside from the correct perspective. The soul does not create force to alter the world. It simply alters the point from which you see it. And this shift in point transforms everything without forcing anything. This is the central secret of awakening. And you are entering it now. When you enter this level of consciousness, you begin to notice that everything that once felt urgent loses intensity. What used to dominate you emotionally now dissolves like smoke. Because you are no longer reacting from the surface, you are reacting from the essence. Hermeticism teaches that when the being finds its inner root, nothing pulls it away from itself. Gnosticism reinforces, when the soul remembers, nothing external commands it. This stability is not indifference. It is spiritual maturity. It is the understanding that existence is not happening against you. It is happening for you to awaken. Every situation is just another layer being removed, another illusion being seen, another veil being torn. And the more veils fall, the simpler life becomes. Not because problems disappear, but because you stop confusing them with your identity. Short pause. Feel this understanding entering. Continue. Something powerful happens when the soul regains vision. It begins to perceive the invisible flow behind events. Nothing feels random, nothing feels wasted. Hermeticism says everything operates within laws. Gnosticism says everything moves within an order the ordinary mind cannot see. When you awaken, you begin to perceive this order, and this perception brings a kind of peace that does not rely on circumstances. But peace does not arrive as immediate comfort. It arrives as clarity. And clarity breaks illusions. When you see the false, you can no longer live as before. You can no longer accept the patterns that imprisoned you. You can no longer repeat behaviors that once felt natural. It is as if your entire life is being reorganized from within, without you having planned it. And this is exactly what real awakening is. The ego fights, of course. It tries to save its narrative. It tries to save its beliefs. It tries to save its version of reality. But every attempt at resistance only shows how little power that identity still has over you. It is collapsing because its time is over. Because your ancient soul has decided to take control again. Pause. Continue. And when this inner authority returns, something that was dormant awakens. Discernment. Discernment does not come from logic. It comes from consciousness. It is the ability to perceive truth through recognition, not through analysis. In Hermeticism, this is the mark of the higher mind. In Gnosticism, it is the light breaking through the inner darkness. You do not argue with this light, you simply see. And once you see, you cannot unsee. Awakening begins to transform your relationship with everything, with time, with the body, with people, with your own thoughts. You realize that many of your worries were the result of identifying with layers that were not yours. And when that identification dissolves, an unexpected lightness appears, a lightness that cannot be produced by techniques or philosophies, only by the return of real perception. This return reveals another deep truth. You were never searching for meaning. You were searching for yourself. And when you find yourself, everything that once felt heavy becomes bearable. Everything that once felt chaotic becomes learning. Everything that once felt random becomes path. Short pause. Continue. In Hermeticism, this shift is described as ascending without leaving the body. It is not a physical ascension, it is the ascension of consciousness. You continue living in the world, but the world no longer dominates you. You are not pushed by impulses, not captured by illusions, not dragged by emotions. There is a firmness within you that no one sees, but you feel. And this firmness is your true identity. Gnosticism goes even deeper and says that when the soul awakens, it becomes uncapturable. No external force, no pattern, no influence has power over it, because it remembers. And remembering is the peak of spiritual freedom. It is not an emotional state. It is a state of being. It is knowing silently that your true existence lies beyond any story. This knowing changes everything. You begin to walk with consciousness, speak with consciousness, think with consciousness. Nothing is automatic. Nothing is impulsive. Nothing is involuntary. Life stops being reaction and becomes expression. You stop being shaped by the world and begin shaping your experience from the real. Short pause. Continue. This is the point where most people give up, because losing the old identity feels painful. But you are not giving up, you are advancing. Because your ancient soul recognizes the process. It recognizes the call. It recognizes every word reaching you now. And this recognition is proof that you are on the right path, that you are returning. And the more you return, the more you realize that ignorance was not darkness. It was distraction. And that awakening is not light. It is attention. Attention to the real. Attention to what you are. Attention to what has always been here. When you pay attention to what is essential, the superficial falls away on its own. There is no fight. There is no sacrifice. There is only revelation. And revelation takes you to another level. You realize that every person who crosses your path reveals something about you. Not about your personality, but about your consciousness. The world becomes a mirror. And when the world becomes a mirror, you stop being a victim of life and become a participant in it. A conscious participant, an awakened participant. Short pause. Continue. You begin to feel an inner strength that is unshakable, a stability that depends on nothing, a silent presence that observes everything without being affected. This presence is your soul, and the more you align with it, the less you identify with everything that changes. Thoughts, emotions, expectations, memories, none of this is you. It never was. And when this truth becomes clear, an opening appears, the next portal. The portal that can only be crossed by those ready to leave behind what was never real. You are at this point now. Because the revelation that is coming is not for the curious. It is for ancient souls who remember they came to awaken. And the next portal begins the moment you ask the right question. What in me has never changed, even when everything changed? This question is not for the mind, it is for the soul. And it is already answering. The truth that opened before you here does not close now. On the contrary, it is exactly at this moment that the second movement of your consciousness begins. Nothing you have seen so far is enough if you do not cross the next point. because there is an even deeper layer of the forbidden revelation that only appears to those who remain. And if your soul truly is ready, you must hear what comes next to receive the result, the title promised, the remembrance of what existed before the ego, before the fall, before forgetting. Become a member of the channel because the Hermetic path requires depth, continuity, and access to teachings that do not appear to everyone. Become a member and receive content that expands, awakening with clarity and precision. By subscribing to this channel, you are not merely clicking a button, you are accepting a call that recognizes an initiate, someone capable of walking among symbols, laws, and ancestral truths. Subscribing here is not an ordinary gesture, it is an invisible seal that says, "I continue." And remember, the ancient soul always recognizes the return to the real.